Welcome back to Psychology Applied to Work. This is Lecture 31, Workplace Conditions. Now, Lecture 30 was a bonus lecture, and that was the video, What is Human Resources? Hopefully you guys saw that and enjoyed that, and we'll get some extra credit for it. This one, Lecture 31, is about workplace conditions, and we're starting Chapter 11. So we're going to explain what workplace conditions are. We're going to talk about the types of workplaces. We're going to talk about workplace design. We're going to talk about this thing called environmental engineering. And we're going to talk about lighting and color and music and climate. All right, let's get started. So why study workplace conditions? Well, the environment, where you are, the environment that you're in matters, and it just so happens that the workplace is an environment. You know, we talked about niches and adaptation and looking at the workplace as a place where one tries to find a niche. And it's certainly the workplace conditions affect the environment that you're in. And there's certainly ways to make workplace conditions more or less conducive to productivity and well-being and all sorts of stuff. So, you know, workplace conditions, that term, you know, that can include lots of physical things, like how warm it is, what's the layout of the space, but it also can it can also address things that are more psychosocial. And those things together, they can impact performance, certainly can impact your job satisfaction, your overall level of engagement. And it can affect how motivated you are at work. It can even affect your safety, whether that's real safety or, say, just perceived safety. And those things and others can affect your stress and health. And so, for example, you know, poor working conditions, you know, or uncongenial work settings, that can lead to greater errors and potentially increased accidents. And then if you remember the Hawthorne effect, you know, if you improve workplace conditions, like if you take a workplace and do something that makes people more comfortable, well, productivity increases. You know, sometimes it's just temporary, and it's a Hawthorne effect, but not always. There's also other domains here. So when we talk about the study of workplace conditions in the workplace environment, in IO psychology, it's crossing over into other disciplines, other domains, and those include environmental engineering, occupational health, facilities, and architecture. Okay, what do we mean by workplaces? What are some general ways? This is a non-complete, non-comprehensive list, but these are some general ways of looking at what's a workplace. So a workplace can be a work site, and that would be like that AI-generated picture there, sort of, like a construction site. They're at a work site. You know, people have gathered and they're building something. You know, they're there temporarily. You'll have purpose-built structures. You know, like maybe trailers, or I mean, if it's really remote. You might even have housing out there, like, you know, think of oil exploration in the Arctic or something, but often these work sites are outdoors. You can also have a factory. You know, factories are usually built around the process. You know, and the process is what is it that you're creating at the factory? Are you assembling things? Or is it a chemical process? But the process by which you assemble things, or the process by which you do the chemistry, or whatever it is, usually that factory, at least ideally, is built around that process. So that's everybody's there, you know, to make the product, so to speak, and that production line is sort of the fundamental constraint that everything should align to. So that becomes a very inescapable element of the workplace environment. And things could be like warehouses where you've got forklifts and people moving pallets, and just movement. You're unloading trucks and putting them on, putting loading pallets off of trucks, truck bays, and putting them up on really high shelves, and then you're coming and unloading stuff off the shelves and putting them. Maybe you're loading them into new trucks to ship, or maybe you're unloading them and bringing them into the factory, or bringing them into the store, or whatever it is that the warehouse serves. And you can also have a retail workplace, and that would be a lot of interpersonal interactions, a lot of standing, potentially a lot of movement. You might have a school, and that would also, at least if you work there as opposed to attending it, you probably have a fair amount of standing, certainly in like an elementary school, the when you're teaching and you're moving around and you're chasing kids all the time. You're up on your feet and you have limited breaks, and it really depends. And universities, especially a research university where a professor might do most of their time might be related to research or other responsibilities, the actual amount of time that they're teaching is less. And then, of course, the more common workplace is the office, and where you might have like cubicle farms, and there's lots of other things that could be put on here. Say like shops. I don't mean retail shops. I mean like repair shops. Places where mechanics are working. Endless other sort of ways of subdividing what a workplace is, but. You get the idea. A lot of variety, and in each one of these workplaces, the type of work being done usually ends up dictating, or at least dramatically influencing, the workplace conditions. So what do you do when you need to design a workplace? I mean, what are some of the things you got to keep in mind? That if you've never thought about this, some of these might surprise you. If you have thought about it, this is pretty common sense. So you need an HVAC system. So what's that? Heating, ventilation, air conditioning. Pretty much any modern building that you're in is going to have a well-designed, sometimes fairly elaborate, certainly mature in terms of technology, HVAC system to make sure it's moving air around, maintaining the right temp, maintaining the right humidity, that you might be bringing in a certain amount of air from the outside so that you're not creating a stuffy, non-circulating kind of air situation. You might be doing filtration. It really depends on where you are and what kind of building. But HVAC is a important design consideration. And of course, lighting. Is it natural lighting? Is it artificial? Lighting itself is its own. There's a huge, multi-billion-dollar market in lighting. And then there's lighting designers, interior designer. There's like subdivisions of architecture and interior design where people look at trying to optimize lighting in spaces. And then considering movement, like how do you get people around? What are the elevators? What are the stairs? Where are they located? How well do they work? What's the hallways? Those sorts of things. And then you got to think about the people and what are they doing. Are they coming in and out of cubes? Are they coming in and out of offices? Are they going down in desks? What are the habitats, so to speak, of the individuals? You got to think about privacy. What is the privacy needs, desires, or requirements? And they think about what are you doing to try to facilitate collaboration along those lines of trying to bring people together. You got to think about your commons spaces, like your cafeterias, your meeting rooms. Also, of course, there's restrooms and those sorts of things. And then what other accommodations? I mean, maybe you have people with disabilities. You certainly would have the Americans with Disabilities Act to make sure that you have accessibility. But other people might have strong preferences for other types of accommodations. Okay, so there's also this thing called environmental psychology. And that's a subdomain of psychology, and that looks at artificial environments, workplace design, and how does workplace design, or how does the workplace affect human behavior? So, environmental psychologists will look at studying the layout, of people locations and desks and where are people? How far apart are they? What kind of desks are they in? How does that help or hinder collaboration and noise and all sorts of stuff? And how does that foster meeting people? What kind of privacy does that give people? And then what are they doing? Are they selling things? Are they collaborating? Are they on the phone? Are they in front of their computer writing code? All of those things factor in what would be really the most conducive environment. And it was from this study that these things called landscape offices came from. So a landscaped office is really a modern office, and this study is sort of broader, what's called built environment. And if you think about the environment, I mean, when you first say that, you think of trees and that sort of thing, but the built environment would be really the artificial environment that people live in, people work in. So what are the built environment factors? We kind of foreshadowed this when we talked about what we were going to cover in the lecture. But lighting is part of the built environment. Noise is, color, music. Sometimes music is put into the built environment intentionally. What is your climate? All right, let's keep going here on environmental psychology a little bit. Let's talk about landscaped office areas. And research has shown that that these sort of carefully designed office setups, often like cubicles and the desks and open areas and that sort of thing, that they have advantages, but they also have shown some disadvantages. And over time, this landscaped office approach has moved away largely, but not completely, but largely moved away from private offices. But there's different types of these. And so the most common, at least right now, would be what people might call cube farms. Where employees are in cubicles and it's a large open space. There's a good manufacturing supply base for cubicle walls, and they're modular, configurable, and relatively inexpensive. So this setup in terms of use of space is a fairly efficient, cost-effective way of bringing people together. That's design is intended to facilitate both the work that gets done, but also the workflow, keeping people, the groups cohesively together, fostering communication. But I mean, people aren't in private offices typically. They're kind of next to each other. Cubicle walls usually aren't very high. They're not designed for a whole lot of sound abatement. I mean, a little bit. So there's often complaints about noise and certainly distraction and general lack of privacy. You may or may not have gone through areas that are, cube farms. I've spent a few decades in and out of them and around them. And it's good and it's bad. And certainly you get situations where somebody is just inevitably just a loud talker when they're on the phone. It seems like they throw 10 decibels out there beyond everybody else. And you have people that have odd habits and all sorts of stuff. And then who knows, are you in a high traffic area, or are you off in the corner? Do you have a window view? There's all sorts of inconsistencies or variation that comes from working inside a cube farm. But there's other ways of setting it up, and what's things called like open seating. And that's where you might not put dividing walls. I mean, you won't, or like short cube walls. It might just be like a sea of tables, or a big flat desks, and everybody's got their computer and their monitor and a chair, and you co-locate your work groups that way. So if it's a software company and you've got a team that's all working on a big application, and they all kind of depend on each other, and their work is interwoven. You might have them all co-located. They're all on their computers. They might have headphones if they want to concentrate while they're writing code and they don't want to hear anything. But you really keep them next to each other, so when you got to go ask somebody, you don't have to make an appointment or IM them or email them. You just kind of swing your chair around and talk to them. And so you have reduced separation, and that's going to increase contact between workers. And then there's another thing that's growing now, where it's unassigned seating, where you have a certain number of these seats and desks. People come in with their laptop and they just go where there's an open space, and that's kind of a new trend. And that's you know, whenever, wherever, find an open spot. And certainly that setup is compatible with flex work, where you know, people might be in the office 3 days a week or 2 days a week or whatever. And of course that has dramatically increased with COVID and post-COVID, and this is still evolving. I mean, there's the people like and dislike, you know, the unassigned seat environment. But when you think about, if you had, say, you know, 500 people that worked in your organization or in your building, and now with post-COVID and lots of people wanting remote work, yeah, let's say you have only 200 of them that want to be in the office all the time, and the remaining 300 are kind of a blend. Well, you actually don't necessarily need the full space you used to have. And if you're leasing a building, well, maybe next time you guys move and lease a smaller building, and then you'd have your 200 permanent seats, so to speak, for the 200 people that want to come to work every day, and then you'd have a certain less number that's just accommodating the number of people that might be there that day, and that the 200 permanent people might have their own desks, and the remaining whatever amount could be an unassigned open seating setup. So lots of ways to do it. You know, none of them are fantastic, but none of them are terrible, and it's still evolving. All right, so some practical stuff here. Lighting. Obviously, you want to be lit so that you can work. If you don't have enough lighting in a workplace, I mean, it's a dissatisfier. If people can't see stuff, if people are straining their eyes to see stuff, it can reduce performance and generally make the place to work not so fun. How much is needed? You know, what's optimal lighting? That varies, and it certainly varies by preference, but it absolutely varies by age. Lighting factors include things like intensity, and so that brightness, the amount of brightness you have should match the work task. You know, how a bunch of fine detail work, you know, you need to have suitable lighting. If you want to have like real high concentration of stuff where people are on their monitors, you know, you don't want to have any glare coming off the monitors. And you know, it really depends. I mean, there's actually some places that really want there are some people that do really detailed computer work on like computer modeling or computer graphics, and some people who like to code, and they prefer really dim lighting. That's not necessarily universally recommended, but lighting preferences vary, and it certainly, the optimal lighting varies by task. And how bright things need to be is definitely an age-related thing. You know, the younger you are, the faster you can adjust to, the faster your pupils dilate or shrink or constrict to accommodate lighting, and the older you are, the slower that process is, which is why when you're a teenager and your grandma comes to visit, and she comes into your room and she goes, "Oh, it's dark in here," and she turns the light on, and you're like, "What did you do? That it's fine." Well, your pupils dilated really nicely, and grandma's would have taken a long time to adjust to the dim light in your room, and so she thinks that what you're experiencing is the kind of darkness that she is. And it's really just the response time of pupils. So that's a big deal with you know, a diverse workforce with lots of age variation. And then how well distributed is the light? I mean, you don't want just one big light in the middle, you know, then you cast in all sorts of shadows, and you don't want shadows moving about because people are moving about. So you want a nice indirect, diffusely lit, you know, ideally kind of uniform. And so there's a whole lot of stuff involved in almost any workplace or classroom environment to try to make the light just this sort of bathing, soft, diffuse, coming from everywhere, which is why walls tend to be pastel colors. It's why lighting tends to be sort of spread out all over the place. It's why ceilings tend to be white. It's generally why you don't see dark colors in anything other than sort of accents. And then glare is an issue. I mean, that's where you're getting a spectral reflectance, which is like a mirror-like bounce from bright lights. And obviously the sun is the biggest one here. But I mean, if you have if you don't have good diffusers on your artificial lights, and you've got this bright point, and you maybe have maybe stainless steel or polished metal surfaces or real glossy plastic surfaces, they can cause really annoying glare. And certainly different types of screens at the right angle can create glare. And too much glare, I mean, it leads to eye strain. If your eyes are strained, or it's hard to actually see well, I mean, that can lead to errors. And of course, there's a natural light element, and generally speaking, it's considered to be psychologically helpful, and even many argue physiologically beneficial. And generally speaking, most people do prefer some amount of natural light. Okay, well, that was lighting, and that should be, I mean, it should be reasonably common sense. You may or may not have recognized the importance of distributed diffuse light and that sort of thing. But once you know that, I mean, you'll see it everywhere. So let's talk about noise a little bit. I mean, noise is definitely a known occupational hazard. And as an example, 75% of farmers, later on in their life, but 3/4 of them will suffer hearing impairment from the noise of their work site or their farm site. You think about all of the combustion engines that they're surrounded by, big diesels and gas engines that are driving pumps and fans and other stuff, big diesels, tractors that they're in for days at a time, sometimes depending upon whether it's the fall or the spring. Just constantly working on things. It's a constant high noise exposure. And even short exposure of something, if it's loud enough, can cause damage. So 130 decibels is that threshold for, or even short exposures can cause permanent hearing loss. And even there's a certain point where you can cause so much damage that you can have deafness. And so the U.S. government has actually established, and OSHA has guidelines associated with what are called maximal permissible sound levels, and these are typically over periods of time, and often it's like in an 8-hour day, 90 decibels is as an example is a maximal permissible sound level. So often what will happen in a factory is, or some sort of loud environment where you're worried that, hey, maybe our environment's too loud. Part of what your safety people will do, or you'll hire somebody to do this assessment for you. They'll outfit some of your employees with microphones and data recorders, and they'll wear them throughout the day, and they're looking for a time-weighted average of sound. And so there'll be times, something slams, and it makes a big noise that all of a sudden that was a little tiny 100 decibel spike, but only lasted a fraction of a second. And what it's doing is it's weighting it over time. And if you are, 90 decibels on average over an 8-hour period, that generally means you need to put in a hearing protection program. Your people need to be wearing earplugs. Oftentimes there's a proactive nature to this, or a preventative nature to this. That if you have like 85 decibels, a lot of companies will feel that to be too close, and they'll institute hearing protection programs. If the time-weighted average of an 8-hour day of somebody's exposure is starting to get close to that 90 decibels. But some places where they work, the loud noises might just come intermittently. And so if you have like 100 decibels that's showing up on a regular basis, that time-weighted average maximum threshold is 2 hours. And then if you have really, really loud stuff in say your factory or your shop or whatever, just 30 minutes of something that's 110 decibels is considered the maximum permissible. And then besides really loud stuff that might cause hearing damage, noise in general, noise by definition, we call it noise for a reason, as opposed to say sound or talking or music. If we're calling it noise, it's something we don't want. And if we don't want it, it's because it's getting in the way of something, or if it's loud enough, it's causing damage. But so noise interferes with communication. So in noisy environments, or if you're in a noisy environment and you're trying to talk, you end up having to talk louder, and then that contributes to the overall noisy environment, because for people who don't want to, who are not part of your conversation, that's not relevant sounds for them, so it's noise for the rest of the group. And so that's if you've been in a restaurant, and a bar is probably the worst situation because people have had a little bit of alcohol, and they tend to they tend to tolerate loudness a little bit more, and they tend to shout a little bit more, and you sort of this race to the bottom, or I don't know, race to the scream, where a whole group of people just get louder and louder, just trying to hear each other. And even a chronic noise that's unpleasant. It doesn't have to be super loud. Scratchy noises or high pitched noises, or just some weird intermittent knocking. It doesn't have to be particularly loud to get to where it can be a stressor, because it just can be a distractor all the time. You just can't tune it out because it's just either so unpleasant or so strangely intermittent that it's just constantly calling your attention and pulling you away from whatever you're trying to do. All right, so we've talked about lighting, and we've talked about noise. Let's talk about color a little bit here. So most of you'll see stuff about color and mood and the reasons why we chose blue here in the workplace to make people feel X or Y. For the most part, those sorts of claims are exaggerated, but color does have important effects. Light colored walls, for instance, can impart a sense of open spaces, which can be beneficial to people's well-being. And that's, as I talked about lighting, the pastel type colors, really sort of washed out. You basically take whatever color you like and then add enough white paint, so it's really just sort of minimally tinted color of a white, and that's when you get into some of those pastels. That's the most common type of color, that level of saturation that you'll get is mostly white, but shaded, and then usually not super shiny, usually not super gloss, and that's a good aid in distributed diffuse lighting, and pleasant looking and feeling, so that it's in sort of a nice open space, engendering. And color is often used for symbolism. Color is used often as safety aids. There's hazard communication colors. The red is often used for things like fire equipment. Yellow lines, yellow tape is often used for safety warnings or danger, or the need for safety glasses beyond this point. Those sorts of things. But there isn't validity, correlation or cause between productivity and specific colors. Like if you're going to make widgets at a factory and you choose this color, you'll make more widgets than if you choose that color. That's not something that has been established in the literature. But generally speaking, a fresh coat of paint is nice. If things look kind of old and dingy and scuffed up, and paint tends to fade over time, it tends to wash out. It either tends to lighten in a process called chalking, or it can tend to go amber. It can just shift slowly to browns and tans and yellows due to oxidation, and we have sort of a sense for that. Even if it's uniform, we have a sense for what looks like sort of aged paint, and certainly scuff marks and those sorts of asymmetries. Date a place and make it feel old, and a nice fresh coat of paint, just like cleaning it up and organizing it, makes it feel new and fresh, and often has beneficial effects. All right, music. Why are we talking about music in the workplace? Well, a long time ago, before people would stare at computers and need to concentrate, and before people had headphones and that sort of thing, and before people had telephones, and where workplaces were a thing, you were physically doing something, that singing in the job was actually a thing. If the workplace conditions weren't, if workplace conditions were like, I don't know, a really loud coal-fired place that you can't even hear yourself talk, they wouldn't be singing. But a lot of other work environments that were quiet enough, one of the things people would do would be sing. It was also not uncommon for companies to hire musicians. And the effects of music depend on the type of work. If the work is really dull, and people are, having to, you don't want people to get too bored because they might make errors. Music can be helpful. It can boost the accuracy of things that might be tedious and boring. Gives a thing to attend to, a pleasant thing to attend to with the music. That can help with monotonous and repetitive work from zoning out and making an error. But there isn't any evidence that if you're doing a job that requires a lot of concentration, that music will help with that. There is some evidence that that if you do have something that needs a lot of concentration and you're listening to music and the music has lyrics, that the lyrics will sometimes demand your attention and can actually hurt your concentration. Okay, let's talk about climate a little bit. So temperature and humidity, those can affect things like morale and even efficiency and your physical well-being, your mood, how motivated you are, but it's highly, highly variable. A major complaint, for what it's worth, is with regard to climate from office workers is often that it's too cold. But high temperature, for instance, if people have to work in an environment that has high temp, it doesn't have an effect, a documented effect on mental work. I mean, obviously to a point. There's a point where temperatures can become genuinely unsafe. But overall, a higher temperature environment, if you're doing strenuous tasks, can lower your performance. High temperature demands things of you physiologically so that you can try to stay cool. For whatever it's worth, highly motivated people are better able to maintain productivity when they're in either hot or cold. And that's sort of within self, that's almost within what defines a highly motivated person. But if you are in an extreme environment, you still have to spend more energy than you would otherwise if you were in a climate, a normal, 72 degree climate. Okay, that's it. It's a fairly short lecture and pretty straightforward. Some interesting stuff. Let's recap what we talked about for workplace conditions for the start of Chapter 11. We talked about types of workplaces and design of those workplaces, introduced environmental psychology, and we talked about lighting and color and music and climate. And then we'll finish Chapter 11 next time talking about workplace challenges, things like different types of schedules, things like shift work, what are the best ways to institute breaks and make sure people have rest and try to prevent fatigue, and then commuting and how that becomes something that you have to deal with. Okay, that's it for that lecture, nice and short, and we'll see you for the next one.